Imagine a world without the Mona Lisa. Not in a vault, but gone. Erased. Imagine Florence without Michelangelo's David, or Amsterdam without the Night Watch. It almost happened. During the Second World War, a systematic campaign of cultural plunder and destruction was unleashed across Europe. It was a war on two fronts. One was fought with tanks and planes. The other was fought with crowbars, shipping crates, and secret lists. It was a war for the soul of a continent, waged in the silent halls of museums and the dusty corners of private collections. This wasn't random looting. It was a calculated effort to seize the artistic heritage of entire nations, to rewrite history by owning its most precious symbols. Some art was stolen for personal greed. Some was taken to be the centerpiece of a monstrous New World capital. And some was simply marked for destruction because it didn't fit a twisted ideology. But in the midst of this chaos, a different kind of army fought back. They weren't soldiers, they were museum directors, curators, librarians, and art historians. They were ordinary people who believed that a painting or a sculpture held something essential about humanity. They believed that saving art was a way of saving the future. How do you hide a 10-ton marble statue? How do you evacuate the entire Louvre in a matter of days? And what happens when the people trying to save the art are the same ones who might be ordered to destroy it? This is the story of their desperate, ingenious, and often secret struggle. Number 5. What if the Louvre was empty? It's August 1939. The air in Paris is thick with tension. War feels inevitable. Inside the Louvre, the grand halls are strangely quiet. The usual crowds are gone. Instead, there's a frantic, organized energy. Men in work clothes are carefully taking paintings off the walls. The sound of hammers echoes as crates are built. This wasn't a renovation, it was an evacuation. The man in charge was Jacques Jaujard, the director of the French National Museums. He wasn't a soldier, but he was a brilliant strategist. For years, he had been quietly preparing for this moment. He knew that in a modern war, cultural treasures would be targets. He had secret plans, color-coded and meticulously detailed, for how to get France's greatest art out of Paris and into hiding. The star of the show, of course, was the Mona Lisa. Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece is surprisingly small, but its value is immeasurable. It couldn't just be wrapped in a blanket and thrown in a truck. A special case had been designed for it, padded and insulated to protect the delicate poplar wood panel from changes in temperature and humidity. On August 28, 1939, just days before the German invasion of Poland, the Mona Lisa was taken from its spot on the wall. It was placed in its custom crate, which was marked with 3 simple red dots for top priority. It left the Louvre in the back of an ambulance, part of a convoy of trucks that looked like they were moving theatrical sets. It was the beginning of a long journey. The first stop for the Mona Lisa and hundreds of other Louvre treasures was the Château de Chambord in the Loire Valley. Its vast, sprawling complex seemed like the perfect hiding place. But as the war progressed, no place was truly safe. De Jaujard and his team understood this. They operated on the principle of constant movement. They never let the art stay in one place for too long. Over the next 4 years, the Mona Lisa became a fugitive. It was moved from Chambord to the Château de Louvigny, then to an abbey in Loc-Dieu, then to the Musée Ingres in Montauban. Each move was a risk. A stray bomb, a mechanical failure, an informant. The curator in charge of her transport, René Huguet, later wrote about the immense stress, treating the painting like a critically ill patient. He knew that the fate of the world's most famous painting rested in his hands. But what about the larger pieces? How do you hide a goddess? The Winged Victory of Samothrace, the magnificent Hellenistic statue that commands the main staircase of the Louvre, presented a massive problem. It stands over 18 feet tall, with its base, and weighs several tons. It's also incredibly fragile. The team couldn't just crate it up. Jaujard's plan was meticulous. A custom-built wooden ramp was constructed down the entire length of the Daru staircase. The statue was painstakingly encased in a protective frame, and then, inch by agonizing inch, slowly winched down the ramp. It was a feat of engineering born of desperation. Once it was safely on a truck, it too was driven to the countryside, to the Château de Valenque, where it spent the war years. The same problem applied to the Venus de Milo. Another icon of classical beauty, she was too big and too important to leave behind. The curators carefully packed her and sent her on her own secret journey, also to Valenque. Imagine the scene convoys of unmarked trucks rumbling through the French countryside at night, carrying the collective memory of Western civilization. According to the Louvre's own archives, the evacuation involved 203 vehicles carrying 1,862 wooden crates. In total, over 3,600 paintings and countless other objects were spirited away to more than a dozen different chateaux and abbeys. Jaujard's operation was so successful that when German officials arrived at the Louvre, they found it almost completely empty. The grand halls echoed with their footsteps. The walls were bare, marked only by the ghostly outlines where masterpieces had once hung. While Jaujard managed the evacuation, another quiet hero was playing a dangerous game back in Paris. Her name was Rose Valland. She was an art historian and a volunteer at the Jeux de Paume Museum. During the occupation, the German regime turned the Jeux de Paume into their central clearinghouse for stolen art. It was here that they processed thousands of pieces of art looted from private collections, especially those belonging to Jewish families. Valland, a small, unassuming woman, was allowed to stay on. The occupiers saw her as a harmless spinster, someone to keep records. They had no idea she was a spy. She spoke German, but pretended she didn't understand it. She listened to every conversation. She secretly copied shipping records, noting which artworks were going where, who they were stolen from, and which high-ranking officials were taking them. She risked her life every single day, memorizing details and stuffing notes into her pockets. Her information, compiled in her book Livre de l'Art after the war, would be absolutely crucial for the Monuments Men, the Allied team tasked with tracking and recovering stolen art. She was the reason so many stolen pieces found their way back to their rightful owners. She saw the crates arriving filled with Picassos, Matisses, and Rembrandts. She watched as Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, came to the museum like it was his personal department store, picking out treasures for his own collection. And she recorded it all. The story of the Louvre's evacuation is a testament to foresight and courage. It shows that the battle to save culture began long before the first shots of the war were fired. Jaujard's plan wasn't just about saving objects, it was about preserving a nation's identity when its very existence was under threat. The empty Louvre was a symbol of defiance. It told the occupiers that while they might control the streets of Paris, they could not capture its soul. But what do we still not know? How many other secret caches of art were there that we've never discovered? What happened to the lower priority items that were left behind in the Louvre cellars? And what was the psychological toll on Rose Valland, a woman who had to watch the cultural heart of her country be torn apart, piece by piece, right in front of her eyes, all while smiling and pretending she noticed nothing? Number 4, could you hide a masterpiece in a salt mine? Some hiding places are chosen for their secrecy, some are chosen for their security, and some are chosen for their stability. A salt mine, deep inside a mountain in Austria, offered all 3. The Altaussee salt mine had been in operation for centuries. It was a labyrinth of tunnels stretching for miles underground. The temperature and humidity inside were remarkably constant, which is perfect for preserving old fragile things like panel paintings and canvases. It was this natural perfection that made it the ideal spot for the German regime to create the world's most valuable and secret art depot. It was intended to be the primary holding facility for the art destined for the Führer Museum, a colossal museum complex planned for the Austrian town of Linz. By 1944, the tunnels of Altaussee were crammed with treasure. It was a breathtaking collection. There were over 6,500 paintings, including works by Vermeer, Rembrandt, Rubens, and Michelangelo. There were sculptures, tapestries, rare books, and priceless furniture. It was the artistic heritage of Europe, stolen and hidden deep within the earth. And among the thousands of items were 2 of the most significant pieces of Northern Renaissance art, the Ghent altarpiece and the Bruges Madonna. The Ghent altarpiece, officially known as the Adoration of the Mystic Lamb, created by the brothers Hubert and Jan van Eyck, is more than just a painting. It is a national symbol of Belgium. Its history is a drama of theft and recovery spanning 6 centuries. It had been taken by Napoleon and later returned. One of its panels was stolen in the 1930s and never found. When the war began, Belgian authorities knew the altarpiece would be a prime target. They sent it to France for safekeeping, hiding it in the Château de Pau. But after France fell, the German forces demanded it. In 1942, they seized the masterpiece and transported it, first to a castle in Bavaria, and then, finally, to the Altaussee salt mine. Deep underground, its luminous panels depicting the salvation of humanity sat in the cold, dark silence, waiting for their fate to be decided. Not far from the altarpiece rested another masterpiece that had been stolen from Belgian Michelangelo's Madonna and Child, known as the Bruges Madonna. It is a profoundly beautiful and tender sculpture, and it is the only work of Michelangelo to leave Italy during his lifetime. The people of Bruges considered it their own. In 1944, as Allied forces were advancing, a group of German soldiers entered the Church of Our Lady in Bruges. They told the priests they were taking the Madonna for safekeeping. They wrapped it in mattresses, loaded it onto a Red Cross truck to avoid suspicion, and drove it away. Its disappearance was a blow to the city's morale. Like the Ghent altarpiece, its journey ended in the darkness of the Austrian salt mine. While the regime was hiding its loot in Austria, the Dutch were busy hiding their own national treasure. Rembrandt's The Night Watch is enormous. It's nearly 12 feet high and 14 feet wide. You can't just put it in a crate. As war loomed, the director of the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, Frederik Schmidt de Giener, knew he had to protect it. His plan was audacious. In 1939, the painting was taken down from the wall. The curators couldn't move it in its frame, so they had to remove the canvas from its stretcher. Then, they carefully rolled the massive painting around a large, specially made cylinder. It looked like a giant roll of carpet. The rolled-up masterpiece was first moved to a castle south of Amsterdam. But as the threat of invasion grew, a more secure location was needed. The Dutch government had built a special bunker in the coastal dunes near Castricum. The Night Watch was moved there. But even that wasn't safe enough. The curators feared an Allied invasion on the coast could put it in the crossfire. So it was moved one last time. Its final hiding place was a specially constructed vault carved into the St. Petersburg caves, a network of marlstone quarries near Maastricht. For 3 years, Rembrandt's most famous work lay rolled up in a tunnel, protected by a massive steel door, waiting for the war to end. The end of the war brought a new and terrifying threat. As Allied forces closed in on Germany from all sides, the regime issued what became known as the Nero Decree. It was a scorched earth policy. It ordered the destruction of all German infrastructure, industries, and anything of value to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. For the art in the Altaussee mine, this was a death sentence. The local Gauleiter, August Eigruber, was a fanatical loyalist. He placed 8 large crates, each containing a 500-kilogram aerial bomb, inside the mine. His orders were to detonate them, bringing the mountain down and turning the world's greatest art collection into dust and rubble. This is where the Monuments Men enter the story. This special unit of the Allied armies was made up of art historians, architects, and museum curators. Their job was to protect cultural sites and recover stolen art. Men like George Stout, a pioneer in art conservation, and James Rorimer, a curator from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, were now on the front lines of the cultural war. They had heard rumors of the mine and its contents. They were in a desperate race against time. The book The Monuments Men by Robert Etzel details their frantic search. They knew about the Nero Decree. They knew that with a single command, centuries of human creativity could be obliterated. But the real heroes of Altaussee were the local miners. They knew what was stored in their tunnels, they understood its importance. Led by the mines director, Hermann von Gieha, they risked their lives to defy the orders. They secretly removed the bombs from the main art repository. In a final act of sabotage, they used a small, controlled explosion to block the entrance to the mine, making it impossible for the soldiers to get back in and detonate the bombs. When the Monuments Men finally arrived in May 1945, they found the entrance sealed. With the help of the miners, they blasted it open. Inside, by the light of their torches, they found the treasure. There was the Ghent altarpiece, its panels leaning against the salt-encrusted walls. There was the Bruges Madonna, serene and undamaged. It was the single greatest art recovery in history. The story of the salt mine is a stark reminder of how close we came to losing everything. It wasn't just a collection of objects, it was a repository of ideas, of beauty, of history. Its salvation was a victory of ordinary people, miners, and curators over a destructive ideology. But the story isn't over. What other smaller repositories were blown up before they could be found? How much art was funneled out of the mine by corrupt officials in the chaotic final days of the war, stuff that was never cataloged? And what would have happened if the local miners hadn't been brave enough to defy a direct order, an act that would have meant their certain execution? Number 3, why would a dictator want a Vermeer? The art theft of the Second World War wasn't just about material wealth, it was deeply personal and ideological. For the leader of the German Reich, Art was not just decoration, it was a tool to build a new world. His dream was to transform his provincial hometown of Linz, Austria, into the cultural capital of the world. He planned a massive museum, the Fuhrer Museum, that would house the greatest collection of European art ever assembled. This wasn't just an architectural project, it was the physical manifestation of his vision for a purified culture. And to fill this museum, he needed art, a lot of it. This set off an unprecedented state-sponsored looting campaign. Special units like the Einsatzstabreichsleiter Rosenberg ERR were tasked with confiscating art, especially from Jewish collections in occupied territories. One of the paintings he coveted most was Johannes Vermeer's The Astronomer. It's a quiet, contemplative masterpiece. It shows a scholar in his study, his hand resting on a celestial globe, bathed in the soft light from a window. For a man obsessed with destiny and cosmic significance, the painting held a powerful allure. The painting belonged to the Rothschild family in France. When German forces entered Paris, the Rothschild collection was one of their first targets. The Astronomer was seized by the ERR in 1940. It was stamped on the back with the small black swastika of the regime and cataloged for the Linz Museum. It spent the war years with thousands of other stolen masterpieces in the Altaussee salt mine, waiting to be hung in a museum that would never be built. Its recovery by the monuments men was a symbolic victory. It represented the return of a pensive humanist masterpiece from the clutches of a violent anti-intellectual regime. Another painting with a dramatic story of theft and recovery is Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine. This stunning portrait belonged to the Czartoryski family in Poland. It was the crown jewel of their collection in Krakow. The Czartorysky's knew the painting was in danger. Just before the invasion in 1939, they took it from its frame and hid it in a bricked-up alcove in a country palace. But the hiding place was soon discovered. The painting was seized. For a time, it was used to decorate the residence of Hans Frank, the governor-general of occupied Poland. He hung it in his office at Wawel Castle. But as the war turned against the Reich, Frank took the painting with him as he fled. In 1945, American soldiers from the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program found the painting in Frank's country home in Bavaria. It was returned to Poland, a symbol of national pride reclaimed. Lynn H. Nicholas's groundbreaking book, The Rape of Europa, chronicles these systematic thefts in harrowing detail, showing how personal greed and official policy merged into a devastating cultural assault. The personal art collection of the Reich's second-in-command, Hermann Göring, was a separate but equally vast enterprise. While his leader dreamed of a public museum in Linz, Göring was building a massive private empire of art at his country estate, Carenhall. He used his position to acquire, or more accurately, extort, thousands of artworks. He took what he wanted from the ERR's halls and used a network of dealers to purchase art, often at forced prices from desperate collectors. His taste was more flamboyant than his leaders, favoring grand tapestries, lavish decorative arts, and sensual old master paintings. The competition for art between the two most powerful men in the regime created a frantic, acquisitive frenzy across Europe. But not every story has a happy ending. The most tragic loss from this era is Raphael's portrait of a young man. Like Lady with an Ermine, it was part of the Czartoryski collection in Krakow. It was a sublime Renaissance portrait, believed by some to be a self-portrait of Raphael himself. It was stolen along with the Leonardo in 1939. It too was taken by Hans Frank, and then it vanished. Its last known location was with Frank in 1945, but when his possessions were recovered, the Raphael was gone. What happened to it? No one knows for sure. The theories are endless. Was it destroyed in the chaos of the final days of the war? Was it hidden by Frank in a secret location that has yet to be found? Or was it taken by a soldier, either German or Allied, who had no idea of its value, and is it now hanging, unrecognized, in someone's home? The search for this painting continues to this day. It is the most significant single artwork still missing from the war. Its empty frame serves as a permanent, painful reminder that not everything that was lost has been found. The story is a central theme in the documentary, The Rape of Europa, a haunting testament to the cultural wounds that have yet to heal. The obsession with specific paintings reveals the psychology of the regime. It wasn't just about power, it was about possession. Owning a Vermeer or a Leonardo was a way of owning history itself, of legitimizing a brutal ideology by cloaking it in the beauty of the past. It was an attempt to steal the soul of Europe, one masterpiece at a time. But what about the art that was considered degenerate by the regime? As thousands of modern works by artists like Picasso, Klee, and Kandinsky were confiscated. Where did they all go? How many were secretly sold to fund the war machine, and how many were simply burned in massive bonfires? And could the portrait of a young man still be out there, hidden in an attic or a forgotten bank vault, waiting to be rediscovered? Number 2, how do you protect a statue from a bomb? While theft was a major threat to art during the war, it wasn't the only one. In Italy, the cradle of the Renaissance, the greatest danger was outright destruction. As the Allied campaign moved up the Italian peninsula, cities like Florence, Milan, and Pisa became battlegrounds. Air raids, artillery shelling, and street fighting put centuries of irreplaceable art and architecture directly in the line of fire. The challenge here was different. It wasn't about hiding art from looters, it was about shielding it from tons of high explosives. The most iconic symbol of this struggle is Michelangelo's David in Florence. The colossal statue, a symbol of Florentine liberty and Renaissance perfection, stands over 17 feet tall. It's carved from a single block of marble. Moving it was impossible. So the question was, how do you protect it where it stands? The answer was a strange and monumental feat of defensive architecture. Under the guidance of the city's arts superintendent, Giovanni Poggi, a team of workers built a protective cocoon around the statue. First, they erected a steel scaffolding. Then, they meticulously constructed a tapering tower of bricks around David, leaving a small cushion of air between the bricks and the marble. The structure was designed to absorb the shockwave of a nearby bomb blast and to deflect shrapnel. For years, Michelangelo's masterpiece was completely entombed. Photographs from the time show the Galleria dell'Accademia with this bizarre brick silo standing in the middle of it. It was an act of faith, a belief that the war would end, and that one day David could be freed. It was a slow, painstaking process to build, and an equally careful process to dismantle after the liberation of Florence in 1944. When the last brick was removed, David was revealed, unharmed, a powerful symbol of resilience. A similar, and even more dramatic, story unfolded in Milan. Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper is not a painting on canvas. It was painted directly onto the wall of the dining hall of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie. It's a fresco, which means it is part of the building itself. You can't move it, you can't hide it, you can only protect it. The Italian authorities, anticipating air raids, did what they could. They erected a massive wall of sandbags, supported by steel beams and scaffolding, against the wall bearing the fresco. It was a desperate measure. On the night of August 15, 1943, an Allied bomb scored a direct hit on the convent. The blast was devastating. It blew the roof off the dining hall and destroyed the side walls. The next morning, when the dust settled, it was a scene of utter devastation. The hall was a pile of rubble, open to the sky. But incredibly miraculously, the wall with the Last Supper was still standing, protected by its shield of sandbags. The fresco was exposed to the elements, but it had survived. The story is a chilling reminder of how close the world came to losing one of its most profound works of art. The survival of the Last Supper was less about planning and more about sheer dumb luck. A few feet in either direction, and it would have been obliterated. The treasures of the Uffizi Gallery in Florence faced a different kind of threat. The Uffizi holds one of the world's most important collections of Renaissance paintings, including masterpieces by Botticelli, Leonardo, and Raphael. Evacuating the entire collection was a monumental task. As the front line of the war moved closer, the gallery's curators, working with the monuments men, packed up thousands of paintings. They were loaded onto trucks and dispersed to various hiding places in the Tuscan countryside, mostly in remote villas and castles. The book Saving Italy by Robert M. Edsel documents this incredible effort. One of the main hiding spots was the Castello di Monteguffoni. Here, masterpieces like Botticelli's Primavera and The Birth of Venus spent the war years. But the danger was not over. As German forces retreated from Florence, they blew up all the city's historic bridges over the Arno River, except for one, the Ponte Vecchio. They mined the approaches to the bridge instead. The explosions destroyed many medieval buildings at either end of the bridge, and the shockwaves caused damage in the Uffizi, which sits right on the riverbank. After the liberation, the work of recovering and restoring the art began. The monuments men, including American art historian Frederick Hart, worked tirelessly with their Italian colleagues to track down the hidden collections. They found paintings stored in damp cellars and dusty attics. They had to negotiate with retreating German officers who had taken some of the art with them. It was a slow, piece-by-piece process of cultural reconstruction. The survival of Italy's art was not a single grand operation like the Louvre evacuation. It was a messy, improvised, and often heroic series of small battles fought by curators, priests, and ordinary citizens who risked their lives to protect their heritage. The efforts in Italy show a different face of the war on culture. It highlights the brutal randomness of modern warfare and the fragility of even the most monumental works of art. A brick tower, a wall of sandbags per cent. These were the simple, desperate tools used to save a civilization's memory from being turned into dust. But what do we still not know? How many smaller churches and chapels in the Italian countryside, with their own unique frescoes and altarpieces, were destroyed without any record? Were there instances where the protective structures built around artworks actually caused long-term damage from moisture and pressure? And how much of the decision to spare the Ponte Vecchio was a calculated act of cultural preservation versus a simple strategic decision made by a local commander? Number 1. What is a nation's soul worth? Some treasures are more than just art. They are the living embodiment of a nation's history, its identity, its very soul. Losing them would be like erasing a part of the national memory. The war saw the theft and disappearance of several such objects, turning their stories into modern legends of loss and survival. The most famous and enigmatic of these is the Amber Room. It wasn't a single object, but an entire chamber, its walls constructed of magnificent panels of amber, gold leaf, and mirrors. Originally created in Prussia in the 18th century, it was gifted to the Russian Tsar Peter the Great and installed in the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg. It was considered an eighth wonder of the world. When German forces advanced on the city, now called Leningrad, in 1941, Soviet curators tried to dismantle the room. But the amber had become brittle over the centuries. They were afraid it would crumble, so they tried to hide it in plain sight, covering the walls with wallpaper. The ruse failed. The German soldiers knew what they were looking for. They dismantled the Amber Room in 36 hours, packed it into 27 crates, and shipped it to Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, where it was reassembled and put on display in the city's Castle Museum. And that is the last time anyone saw it for certain. In the final, chaotic months of the war, Königsberg was heavily bombed by the Allies and then stormed by the Soviet army. The castle was left in ruins. The Amber Room vanished. What happened to it? The theories are legion. Was it destroyed in the bombing? Was it loaded onto a ship that was sunk in the Baltic Sea? Was it hidden in a secret underground bunker or a salt mine that has yet to be found? For decades, treasure hunters, historians, and intelligence agencies have chased down leads, all of them dead ends. The story is a compelling mystery, detailed in the book The Amber Room by Catherine Scott Clark and Adrian Levy. The room's value is almost impossible to calculate, but its cultural loss is even greater. It was a unique masterpiece of craftsmanship, a symbol of Russo-German friendship from a bygone era, swallowed by the hatred of the 20th century. In 2003, a stunning reconstruction of the Amber Room, based on old photographs and a single original mosaic, was completed in the Catherine Palace, but the original remains one of the world's great lost treasures. Another object of immense national importance was the Weizstoss altarpiece in Krakow, Poland. Carved by the German sculptor Weizstoss in the late 15th century, this colossal wooden altarpiece is the largest Gothic altarpiece in the world and a masterpiece of sculpture. It is the pride of St. Mary's Basilica and the city of Krakow. As the German invasion loomed in 1939, Polish citizens worked frantically to dismantle the altarpiece. They took apart the massive structure, which features over 200 carved figures, and hid the pieces in different locations. But the occupiers were determined to claim it. They considered Weizstoss a German artist, and the altarpiece a piece of German heritage that belonged in the Reich. They tracked down the hidden components and shipped them to Berlin, where they were stored in the underground vaults of the Reichsbank. For the people of Poland, its theft was a profound national humiliation, an act of cultural revenge. After the war, the altarpiece was discovered by Polish officials and returned to Krakow in 1946. It took a decade of careful restoration work before it could be reassembled in the basilica, where it stands today, a survivor of a war that tried to steal Poland's past. The story of the Holy Crown of Hungary, also known as the Crown of St. Stephen, is a saga of Cold War intrigue as much as a World War II survival story. This ancient crown is the most sacred symbol of the Hungarian state. It's not just a piece of royal regalia, it is tied to the very concept of Hungarian nationhood. As Soviet forces advanced into Hungary in 1944, a group of Hungarian officers was tasked with getting the crown and other royal jewels to safety. They didn't want them to fall into either German or Soviet hands. They carried the crown in a small black case, moving it from place to place. In a bizarre turn of events, they eventually surrendered to American forces in Austria in 1945. They handed over the crown for safekeeping. For the next 3 decades, the Holy Crown of Hungary resided not in Budapest, but in the United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox, Kentucky. It was a strange limbo for such a potent national symbol. Finally, in 1978, as a gesture of goodwill, President Jimmy Carter arranged for the crown to be returned to Hungary. Its journey home was a major national event, a sign that a painful chapter in the country's history was finally closing. Perhaps the most complex story of cultural preservation involves the treasures of Monte Cassino. This ancient abbey, perched on a mountaintop in Italy, was a repository of priceless manuscripts, books, and art. In 1943, two German officers, Lieutenant Colonel Julius Schlegel and Captain Maximilian Becker, realized the abbey was directly in the path of the advancing Allied armies. They were both devout Catholics and art lovers. Acting on their own initiative, they persuaded the abbot to let them evacuate the monastery's treasures. Over several weeks, they organized a fleet of trucks to transport the abbey's entire library and archives, some 70,000 volumes, to Rome and the safety of the Vatican. It was a remarkable act of preservation by members of the occupying army. Just a few months later, in February 1944, the Allies, wrongly believing the abbey was being used as a German artillery post, launched a massive bombing raid that completely destroyed the historic monastery. The bombing of Monte Cassino remains one of the most controversial Allied actions of the war, but because of the foresight of two German officers, its intellectual treasures survived. The story complicates the simple narrative of good versus evil. It shows that even within a destructive war machine, individuals can make choices that affirm the value of human culture. These stories show that the stakes were higher than just protecting beautiful objects. The fight was over national identity, historical memory, and the right of a people to their own story. The Amber Room's absence is a ghost that still haunts us, while the return of the crown of St. Stephen was a resurrection. So, what are the final unanswered questions? Could the Amber Room have been secretly loaded onto a U-boat and taken to South America, as some of the more wild theories suggest? How many other national treasures from Eastern European countries were taken by Soviet trophy brigades at the end of the war and remain unacknowledged in Russian museum depots? And in the strange case of Monte Cassino, if those two German officers hadn't intervened, would the world have lost the foundational texts of Western monasticism forever in the rubble?